Good afternoon. This is the Viking Research Report with John Rosamondo with my guest, Turkish journalist Abdullah Bozkurt. He's spent the past decade or more looking into the activities of Turkey's intelligence agency, the MIT, and its support for jihadists across the Middle East and North Africa, and also it's clandestinely controlling the Syrian government under Ahmed Shara, formerly known as Abu Muhammad al-Jilani. So, Abdullah, could you just tell me a little bit about what Erdogan has accomplished? I mean, I think I remember going back about 10 years that Erdogan was supporting them when they were still Jabhat al-Nusra and providing them with logistics and so forth. Just tell me a little bit about some of the history and what you're seeing now.
Well, I guess we have to go back to 2011 when the Syrian crisis started. I think that was a time when Erdogan saw an opportunity to install an Islamist government in Damascus. And for that to happen, he and his buddies, especially Qatar, they bankrolled, finance, provide logistics and arms, provided intelligence and the manpower and expertise to the jihadist group in Syria. And the primary group that the Turkish government, especially through the Turkish intelligence agency, MIT, as you pointed out, honed in as a main group to back is the Al-Qaeda groups, because they were the ferocious fighters. Some of them were experienced ones, not just the Turkish Al-Qaeda groups, but also Syrian, Afghani, and many other different nationalities that were pouring into Syria through the Turkish territory. So
wasn't it the case that the Muslim Brotherhood kind of was the front for putting together the political will that the Turks used to manipulate the situation on the ground, while everybody looked the other way while they supported Al-Qaeda?
Well, that was the packaging they presented to the world. I mean, of course, they were aligned pretty much with the Muslim Brotherhood, not just in Syria, in many other places as well. They were presented as the moderate rebels and later renamed as the Syrian National Army. But on the backstage, the main fighting force, the Turkish intelligence, has been working with actually the Al-Qaeda groups. We have seen that from the documentary evidence that I gathered from the Turkish military. Remember back in 2015 and 2017, when the Turkish government worked with the American administration on the train and equip program?
Yes.
The program was supposed to be going to the moderate rebels, providing them with the training, providing them with the logistics as such. So the dynamic is working like this. The American government, they were sending a lot of military supplies through Incirlik Air Base in Turkish province of Adana. And the Turkish government is providing the training on the ground. But the vetting process, the selection process, is done by the Turkish intelligence agency, MIT. What the MIT did at the time, they were picking up all kinds of jihadist groups, especially the Al-Qaeda, at the time known as the Jabhat Nusra, Nusra Front. And they were trying to pass this to the CIA as a moderate rebels. I saw all the names, hundreds of the names. They were picked by the Turkish intelligence and they were passing to the CIA for another vetting process. And the CIA came back to the Turkish government and said, look, all these names you are passing to us as a moderate rebels, they were flagged. They were, hardcore jihadist groups. So that was a major discussion at the time in the Turkish government between the military, Turkish military, and the Turkish intelligence, because Turkish military was supposed to train them, Turkish intelligence supposed to vet them and put the names together. So it didn't work out at the time.
Well, as you saw during
Turkish military, the Turkish military at the time was pretty much run by the pro-NATO officers. So they realized the MIT is actually deceiving them. So they just discarded the program. They tried to set up their own groups for the train and equip program. But eventually, as you know, the program is completely disbanded.
Well, as you heard during the confirmation of Tulsi Gabbard to be the director of national intelligence, this whole operation came front and center. I mean, she's been one of the forefront in American politics about calling out the Erdogan
Right.
government. And could you just go a little bit into, the morphing between Jabhat al-Nusra to HTS and the role the MIT played in that Kabuki theater?
Well, Ahmet Shara was the main asset the Turkish intelligence MIT was using on the ground. So if you look at the map of Syria, they were hunkered down in the northern part of Syria, very close to the Turkish border. So the main revenue they were extracting from the cross-border trade, from all kind of different custom levies as such, they were coming from the Turkish side. So without the Turkish intelligence green signaling, the movements Ahmed al-Shara, they couldn't accomplish anything. They tapped the Turkish Al-Qaeda groups as a liaison between the MIT and the Nusra Front. And one of the guy actually was convicted in Turkey. He actually served some time in Guantanamo. Then the Americans eventually decided to hand him over to Turkey in 2005. This guy was later, picked up by the Turkish intelligence in 2011. So they sent him to Syria along with other Turkish Al-Qaeda figures to work with the Jabhat Nusra. So they were provided with all sort of logistical supply from the Turkish side, and the MIT is spearheading the operation. And they couldn't survive without the Turkish protection at all.
So how did the MIT and current foreign minister Hakan Fidan have in morphing them from the jihadis that everybody feared into these terrorists with suits that we see now? Right. I mean, starting about 2017 or so.
Well, in 2013, that was the main push by the Erdogan government to convince the Washington to work with the Jabhat Nusra. It didn't pan out the way they thought, so they eventually, they just repackaged the group and they renamed as, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Actually, that was another name before that is shortly renamed again.
Jabhat al-Sham.
Right, and then they ask him to to declare to the world that they are no longer working with Al Qaeda, and they were just a Syrian indigenous fighting group. It was just
so a window dressing.
At the core, it was the same people, the same group of the people, same leader. But I mean, that was just selling point from the Erdogan government side.
So then it was just a Turkish intelligence op to repackage them, tell them, you're going to do things our way. We're going to, put some good PR out there, make you look good in front of the cameras and so forth, and still end up, with the same sort of, puppet state that Erdogan wanted at the start of the Syrian revolution.
Right. I mean, for example, when Jolani and some of his guys, they were sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury and later on added with the United Nations Security Council sanction list. The Turkish government didn't act at all on those lists. It took a long time, especially after the UN Security Council designating them as an Al-Qaeda terrorist. It took years for the Erdogan government to translate that into the Turkish legal code by publishing their names in the official Gazette on the Turkish side. So, I mean, there are so many indications that from the Turkish government side that they actually have been working with the Al-Qaeda groups in Syria from the start to the end. And actually, the foreign minister, Hakan Fidan, former chief of intelligence, He admitted during the interview with the French TV 24, he said, we had been working with Jolani before. It was, good asset. He was passing a lot of information to us. Whether inadvertently or not, he admitted publicly.
Well, another thing that comes up is, could you talk about the role that the Sadat defense has played in training ISIS, training al-Nusra, training all of these jihadi groups, even in Libya and so forth. I think that people know about Blackwater and some of these other Wagner and these private military companies, but not a lot of people are aware of the role that the MIT has had in controlling this group.
Well, I think we have to go back to 2016. There was a completely different picture in Turkey at the time. As I mentioned earlier, there was a major discrepancy and the discussion between the Turkish military and the Turkish intelligence on whom they're going to be training, on what purpose, and what methods they're going to be using. The Turkish military, is a NATO's second largest army after the Americans. They were working very closely with the Pentagon. And they didn't want to trap themselves with the MIT process of working with the Al-Qaeda groups. So they refused to train some of this jihadist group. They were flagged by their own military intelligence as well as the CIA. That's when the Erdogan government put the Sadat group, the private contractor, to the field, because the Turkish military said, no, we're not gonna train these guys. And then the only option left for Erdogan at the time is to have this Sadat group composed by the former military officers to train them in Syria, in the northern part of Syria, in some sites in Turkey, and later they were also used in Libya and other places as well. But after 2016, when we saw this false flag coup operation, Erdogan used as a pretext to dismiss, almost 2/3 of the generals from the Turkish military. So that he no longer needed Sadat as a private contractor. He has his own guys, generals in the Turkish military, calling the shots. They were pretty much, anti-NATO, anti-American group. So they started, training this jihadist group in the Turkish military installations. So 2016 was a pivotal point when it comes to the role of Sadat.
So how should the Trump administration now be looking at somebody like Mr. Fidan, who Marco Rubio recently met with? It seems to me a little bit like Iran's IRGC, and that Erdogan and his close compatriots are trying to build a Sunni answer to the Iranian regime's operations.
Well, we have to look at the background of Fidan. Hakan Fidan. He's coming from the military. He was nurtured in Shiite circles in Ankara, in the capital, when he was a young non-commissioned officer. In fact, in 2016 and 2011 and 2014, there was a major criminal investigation launched against the IRGC Quds Force network in Turkey. In that investigation file, there was a lot of information about Hakan Fidan, how he was recruited by the Quds Force network in Turkey from the young years. He was fantasizing about establishing the similar mullah regime in Turkey under Erdogan leadership. Again, his successor, Ibrahim Kalın, the current chief of the Turkish intelligence, MIT, I found several articles when he was a young university student. He wrote a lot of articles fantasizing, revering this Ayatollah Khomeini. So there's a lot of Iranian footprint on the critical Turkish leadership, and they actually borrow the playbook from the Iranian side and implement this on the Turkish territory. It's I think the number the if Iranian number two, I will say the current Turkish government. In that investigation file, actually, there was a very interesting piece of evidence. I wrote about it. If you remember, back in 2010, there was a discussion among the NATO leaders on how to establish a missile system and the radar system to counter not only Russian but the Iranian, medium and long range missiles. The radar base is supposed to be set up in Turkey, close to the Iranian border, and the missiles is supposed to be installed in the Romania. In the private discussion, Erdogan was telling his deputies, saying that, well, I don't have enough power right now to stop this process from the NATO. I'm going to have to say yes for the radar base to be set up in Turkey. But when I have enough power in the future, I'm going to screw all the, these Israelis, Americans, and the NATO. And that was added as evidence in this criminal investigation file. Erdogan is following that roadmap from the start. He got rid of the military now. He completely destroyed the independent and critical media. He controls the judiciary. He can do pretty much whatever he wants in the Turkey.
So how does Erdogan use NATO as a shield to keep American policymakers, people in Europe, from looking at his nefarious activities, whether it's his support for Hamas, whether it's support for the Taliban, whether it's support for HTS, Jabhat al-Nusra, the jihadis in Libya. I mean, could you just sort of explain, how he's able to keep people from looking at what's really going on? And do you think that he's used Ukraine as and Russophobia as a distraction to keep them from taking what he's doing seriously?
Right. I mean, he's playing a spoiler game within the NATO structure. We saw that when the Sweden and the Finland applied for a membership, it took a year for the Sweden eventually convinced the Erdogan government to get the full membership. It took a little less for the Finland, and he played that card before when this new Secretary General nominated in the former Norwegian Prime Minister. So he's kind of playing a spoiler game to get what he wants from the NATO. Being within the club brings a lot of benefits because the NATO operates on a consensus basis, and he's going to use that court as a blackmail sometimes, as a spoiler sometimes just for a bargaining for personal benefit. And that's not going to stop there because, let's say Sweden wants to have something within the NATO structure to set up, something very important for them. Again, they need a Turkish approval. So yeah, they are the full member now, but even on the operational stages, they're going to need the approval of the Turkish government. So Erdogan is going to use those, leverages to get what he wants, sometimes divide the NATO alliance, sometimes to get, something has nothing to do with the NATO military operation at all. So, I mean, that needs to be watched very carefully. And he used, as you pointed out, he used the Ukrainian and Russian conflict again, sort of presenting himself as a balancing actor, but when in fact he was actually benefiting not only personally, but also, enriching associates by allowing Russia to, bypass all those sanction systems. The Turkey never, applied the sanction regime against Russia during this critical time. He opted out from both NATO and the European Union sanction against Russia. And many oligarchs, they came to Turkey, they acquired Turkish citizenship, like senior Hamas leaders. They also come and settle in Turkey. They even changed their names after they acquired the Turkish citizenship. and the senior leaders, they were protected around the clock by the Turkish intelligence with a close protective detail. So I think Erdogan is a dangerous guy, but we haven't seen from the European side or the American side to really confront this man forcefully.
Well, what are you seeing in terms of the growing tensions between Israel and Erdogan? Is some people will say that Erdogan is just being blustery. He doesn't mean it, and now he has HTS, as his manipulated government in Syria. So, what do you see as the dynamic, military and otherwise, between Israel and Turkey?
Well, well, I mean, this is an old argument that Erdogan is just blustering, it's just a rhetoric, nothing in the substance. That's not true at all. Erdogan pretty much speaks of his mind, especially when he doesn't read from the script during delivery of speeches. I think he's anti-Semitic. He hates Israel, but for the purposes of establishing, good working relation with the Americans and the European governments, he tried to mend the fences in the past, tried to normalize with Israel. It didn't happen. On each occasion, it just, faltered down. It was completely destroyed. Now, I think we moved a new stage between Turkish and the Israeli relations. For the first time, President Erdogan named Israel as a national security threat, which is unprecedented. He said it repeatedly. The Israelis, after taking over Gaza, they're gonna come to Turkey. They're gonna annex, the eastern part of Turkey. They're gonna invade the Turkish territory, which is ridiculous. I mean, there is nothing, historically you can build any fact on this. And Israeli government repeatedly denied they have no intention whatsoever, invading Turkey. But Erdogan is building a narrative and trying to reshape the national security framework that the Turkish, government agencies operate. Naming Israel as a national security threat, at the same time, praising the Hamas fighters as a resistance fighters, combating not only for themselves, for Palestine, but also for the integrity of the Turkish territory. This is something else. At the policy level, we have seen a solid evidence. The Turkey is dramatically shifting to the anti-Israel group. The completely cut off the trade relation with Israel, which is unprecedented. Now they are discussing how to punish, dual Israeli-Turkish nationals if they serve in the Israeli army, stripping of their citizenship in Turkey, confiscating their assets. So it's a huge campaign going on behind this rhetoric.
So, do you think that Israel's security zone that's established in southwestern Syria actually is like aimed at Turkey and possible Turkish aggression or Turkish sponsored or inspired aggression?
I think if you hear the remarks of some of the people around Ahmed al-Shara in Syria, in fact, several of them Turkish national. They changed their names. They acquired the Syrian nationality, and they are serving, as a lieutenant generals in the new Syrian army. So they were discussing about next targets, and they were very vocal on identifying Israel as one of those targets and replicating the success they accomplished in Syria in other countries, starting from Jordan, which is very close, is a small, tiny state, all the way to Yemen, Egypt. But their main focus also is pretty much on Israel. And the Erdogan government is sort of running the Syrian government, as a shadow, sending, military advisors, the civilian advisors, as a sort of parallel structure. They were, they set up in Syria. You see the Syrian Arab officials on the front But in the background, actually, the guys who are calling the shots is many of them came from Turkey. They are working in the shadows, and they are sort of assigned as sharing the expertise with the new Syrian government. That's, I think, in the short run, they're going to take some time because they need to build the Syria first. They need to consolidate the power base. They need to bring all those different groups in the country together, which seems to be very problematic at the moment, especially with the Kurds and the Druze groups. But in the medium and the long run, I think they're gonna have their targets on Israel and other Arab states.
Well, what do you think? Have you seen any evidence the MIT is working with Islamists in Jordan, Egypt, etc.? I mean, I think that I recall that during the Sinai uprising, that Egyptian intelligence found people with Turkish intelligence documents or something like that, like Turkish IDs and so forth.
Well, Erdogan has an ambitious agenda. He sees himself as a sort of caliph, the leader of the entire Muslims. So he's gonna, install himself in all the territories that he thinks can be justified from his point of view. So the Turkish intelligence work with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and other more radical groups as well. They are working with similar groups in Africa, especially in Niger and Sudan. So they're gonna expand the territory they have been working pretty much, Middle East and the North Africa region. They don't have the capacity and the resources to make that happen very quickly. So they're gonna take their time, as they did in Syria. It took for them, for almost a decade, 13 years. To finally have their guys in power in Syria. So they're gonna, take their time. They're gonna wait for the right moment and opportunity. But in the meantime, they're gonna keep working with the Americans and the Europeans on their sort of more positive agenda.
So then you look at the whole NATO project and so forth as a smokescreen that Erdogan can get like American intelligence and European intelligence agencies to look the other way while the MIT sets the stage for the next revolution.
Absolutely. I mean, Erdogan government cleverly used the migrant issue to blackmail the Europe, for example. They actually tried a couple of times how that problem can escalate it very quickly when the Turkish intelligence brought, hundreds of the, not just the Syrians, but also Afghanis, Iranians and other, African groups. They tried to migrate to Europe through Turkey. They were sheltering on the deportation centers in Turkey, and Turkish intelligence and the police picked them up and brought all the way to the Greek border and pushed them through Europe. Can you imagine what kind of impact that kind of wave inflict on multitude of the European governments, especially when this immigration issue is almost a number one issue that we have been discussing in many European countries. Just yesterday, the Germany had an election, and immigration was the number two or number one matter during the election campaign. The same in Sweden, same in many other countries. So Erdogan used this migrant issue, as a trump card to push them into sometimes silence, not being very vocal when the Turkish intelligence is doing a lot of nasty stuff from Libya to Azerbaijan to Syria, or human rights violation, for example. It worked like a charm in many cases.
So it was sort of, we're coming to an end here, running close on time. You see that Erdogan is probably one of the most masterful politicians in the world, because he's able to be inside the lines of the Western alliance. So they're not going to go after him like they would go after Iran, even though he's playing both sides of the fence and working to subvert friendly governments.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you pretty much summed up, what Erdogan vision for the future of Turkey and the region. He's a very dangerous guy. He has, he's going to risk the region for further destabilization, and he needs to be watched very carefully, and it needs to be contained. Frankly, I mean, not to be appeased for different purposes. He needs to be contained. I mean, he completely destroyed the Turkish democracy. I mean, there is no opposition left in Turkey. There is no independent, media left, no independent judiciary, and the military is pretty much his own personal guard now. It's not a NATO force anymore. So, I mean, he needs to be contained and confronted very forcefully.
Well, thank you, Abdullah. We've come to the end of the latest edition of the Viking Research Report. Stay tuned for the next episode.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.